Hello everyone. Today I will be presenting a slideshow on personality disorder and defiant behavior based on chapter 14 of our course material. This presentation combines psychological and sociological perspectives to explore how personality disorders develop and how behaviors come to be labeled as defiant. First, we're going to talk about what is personality disorder. According to the DSM, it is an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that defies from cultural expectations. So basically, it's just defying from what us as a society deem as normal. And it usually begins in adolescence or early childhood, and most importantly can cause significant distress or impairment in a person's life. These disorders can be influenced by a person's background, including their gender, age, ethnicity, and culture. There are 3 different types of personality disorders, and they're divided into 3 different clusters. The first cluster, which is cluster A, includes odd and eccentric disorders like paranoia, schizoid, or schizotypical personalities. Cluster B is marked as dramatic or emotional behaviors such as antisocial, borderline. Don't know how to say that word. I don't want to mess it up. It's the third one in cluster B, and the last one is narcissistic. Cluster C is avoidant, dependent, and obsessive. And understanding all of these clusters can help professionals identify patterns and tailor treatments accordingly. So, what is defiant behavior? Defiant behavior can be referred to as behaviors that violate social norms. This can include crimes, mental illness, suicide, addiction, or even behaviors considered sexual deviant. Or not deviant, I'm sorry, defiant. What's most important to remember is that defiance isn't universal, and what can be considered defiant in one culture can be considered acceptable in another. Defiance as an absolute attribute. In the early 20th century, they treated defiance as like it was a disease. They thought it was a biological stemming disease. So they loved the popular term of born criminal. Another thing was they were criticized for oversimplifying behavior and ignoring social and cultural contexts when defiance would occur, I would say. Defiance as a social myth. Another way to look at defiance is through the lens of power and social control. In this new view, powerful groups define what counts as defiant and impose these definitions on others. For instance, behaviors by radical or ethnic minorities, the disabled, or even people with certain body types can be unfairly labeled as defiant. It's not the act itself, but how society judges and reacts to that defiance. In this slide, we're going to talk about the idea of defiance as abnormal behavior, and we're going to use social norms as the standard. There are 2 levels of norms: the universal norms that exist across all cultures, and there are culture-specific ones. Defiance is defined based on how far a behavior strays away from statistical, biological, psychological, and cultural expectations. A psychologist, John, I don't want to butcher his last name, defined defiance as any behavior that fails to conform to the norms of a specific social system. Now we're going to talk about defiance as a labeling process. Labeling theory takes a different approach. It distinguishes between the primary defiance, which is the initial norm violation, and the secondary defiance, which occurs when a person internalizes the defiant identity. People can argue that labeling doesn't explain why defiance happens in the first place, but it often targets people that are powerless, like children, for instance. But it raises the important question: people aren't defiant until someone labels them as such. That label can become powerful in shaping their future behavior. Why does defiance occur? The explanation can fall into three different categories. Biologically, some researchers look at genetics, such as the genes, brain, and they haven't been able to come to a full consensus of if that's one of the factors. Psychologically, many link defiant behavior to poor and early socialization or to trauma. And socioculturally, defiance can be seen as a response to society in transitions, where norms break down, media glorifies violence, and people who exclude or alienate. People with defiance disorder